A stray dog with the eyes of a soldier appears outside a hospital and refuses to leave. But this isn't just any dog. His name is Bishop, a former K-9 trained for missions most men couldn't survive. When Officer Dean Rourke follows Bishop into a hidden tunnel, he uncovers a secret facility, a failed experiment in weaponizing canine loyalty, and a silent war that never ended. What Bishop reveals will challenge what it means to obey, to protect, and to choose. This is not a story about a dog who followed commands, but about one who broke them to save us all. It was just past 5 in the morning when the first call came through. A quiet 2-lane road in northern Montana, flanked by empty pastures and miles of untouched snow, had been completely blocked off by an abandoned black SUV. No license plates. Engine cold. No sign of the driver. Officer Dean Rourke leaned against the hood of his cruiser, coffee still warm in his thermos, eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses despite the pre-dawn gloom. At 38, he was a man carved from silence, broad-shouldered, methodical, with a gaze that missed little and a voice that seldom wasted words. He had seen enough during 2 tours overseas and 10 years with the county sheriff's department to know that things left in the middle of nowhere rarely meant nothing. But what caught his attention wasn't the vehicle. It was the dog. At first, Dean thought it was just another stray. Medium build, jet black fur with a white patch on its chest, pacing back and forth beside the SUV like it had lost someone inside. But when Dean stepped closer, he saw the dog stop suddenly, ears perked, head tilting slightly as if calculating distance. And then it looked at him. Not with fear, not with need, but with urgency. "You out here on your own, buddy?" Dean murmured. The dog didn't bark. Instead, it trotted a few steps away from the car, turned its head back, then moved farther into the snow-covered ditch beside the road. It stopped again, stared, waiting. Dean's gut tightened. He glanced back toward his cruiser. Dispatch hadn't reported any missing persons or unusual activity in the area. No recent 911 calls. But the SUV, the dog, the silence that hung too heavy for dawn. He pulled out his radio. "Unit 12 to base. I've got an abandoned vehicle on Highway 72 northbound, requesting tow and backup. Might be more to this." "Copy, Unit 12. Sending Deputy Alvarez to your location. ETA 15 minutes. Dean clicked the radio back, then turned toward the dog, now halfway up the incline into the pasture, sniffing the air, body tense. Something was wrong. He followed. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he stepped off the asphalt and into the frozen field. The dog moved ahead in bursts, never too far, always pausing to make sure Dean was still with him. It led him over a low ridge where the tree line began to thicken. And that's when Dean saw it. A streak of red. Fresh blood, barely visible in the white. Dean crouched low, fingers brushing against a torn piece of fabric nylon, dark blue, the corner of a jacket maybe. Next to it, small indentations in the snow. Not just footprints, but drag marks. "Someone's hurt," he whispered. The dog stood a few feet away, growling softly now, not at Dean, but toward the shadows beyond the trees. Dean reached for his sidearm. Another sound. Dying. A low hum. He pressed forward slowly, careful with each step. The trees thinned, opening into a clearing, and there, at the center, lay a man, early 20s. Hands zip-tied behind his back, duct tape across his mouth, eyes wide and panicked. Dean rushed to him, kneeling and checking his pulse. Still alive, hypothermic but breathing. Before he could speak, the dog growled louder. Dean looked up just in time to see movement at the far edge of the clearing. 2 figures, one armed, one raising a phone. Dean's instincts took over. "Get down," he barked, not at the hostage, but at the dog. But the dog didn't run. He lunged. Straight toward the man with the weapon. A shot rang out. Dean drew his firearm, heart hammering, snow flying as he moved. And in that moment, as chaos exploded beneath the cold Montana sky, Dean realized the dog hadn't found him by accident. It had come looking for help, and it had chosen him. The shot cracked across the clearing like a whip, echoing into the frozen treetops. Officer Dean Rourke ducked behind a snow-covered stump, pistol drawn, eyes scanning the tree line. The hostage was still down, shivering violently, and the dog was nowhere in sight after lunging into the gunman's path. Dean's breath formed clouds in the cold as he shouted, "Drop your weapon. You're surrounded." It was a bluff. His backup was still miles out. He was alone, just him and the cold, and maybe the dog, if it was still alive. Another rustle from the right. Dean swiveled, caught a blur of motion, someone moving fast, angling to flank him. He fired a warning shot into the snow. The figure dove behind a log, returning fire with reckless speed. Bark splintered. Snow burst into the air. Dean crouched low and moved sideways, keeping the downed man in his peripheral vision. Then, a sudden growl. It rose from the trees like thunder. Dean turned in time to see the black dog leap from behind a fallen pine, slamming into the second gunman with brutal force. The man toppled, his rifle clattering away. Snarling and teeth bared, the dog pinned him with the precision of a trained K9. Dean didn't hesitate. He closed the distance in 5 strides, kicked the weapon away, and cuffed the man face down in the snow. The man spat curses, writhing, but the dog held firm until Dean gave a single sharp whistle. The dog stepped back, panting, fur dusted in snow, but uninjured. Dean stared. "You're trained," he murmured. "You're not just some stray." The dog tilted its head slightly but didn't break eye contact. A cry broke the moment. The first man, the one with the pistol, was running, fast, toward the other side of the woods. Dean stood, raised his weapon, but the shot would be risky. Too many trees. Too many chances to miss or hit someone else. Then the dog took off. Like a bullet. Wait, Dean started, but it was too late. The black shape darted into the trees faster than Dean could follow. He turned to the hostage, pulled out his knife, and cut the bindings. The man collapsed into his arms, barely able to speak. "I got you," Dean whispered. "You're safe now. Help's on the way." The man's lips moved, chapped and cracked. "More, there's more." Dean's brow furrowed. "More what?" But the man passed out, unconscious. Dean laid him gently down, then activated his shoulder radio. Unit 12, officer requesting immediate medical response and backup. 1 suspect in custody, 2nd fleeing east on foot. Dog in pursuit. Copy, Unit 12, medics en route. Air support requested. Dean stood, snow crunching under his boots as he looked out into the trees. Silence again. Then another sound. A pained yelp, sharp and deep. Dean's chest tightened. He followed the noise, weaving through pines, his breath burning cold in his lungs. 20 meters in, he found them. The second suspect lay face down, motionless, his leg twisted unnaturally. The dog stood over him, chest heaving, blood on his flank but not his own. Dean approached cautiously, gun still raised. "Step away, boy, I got it." The dog obeyed, limping slightly as he moved aside. Dean cuffed the second man quickly, checked his pulse alive. Probably a compound fracture in the leg, but he'd survive. Then Dean turned back to the dog. "You're bleeding." The dog lowered its head, weary but proud. Dean kneeled and inspected the wound. A shallow graze along the side, not life-threatening, but painful. "You saved 2 lives today," he whispered. "Maybe more." He took off his jacket, wrapped it around the dog's shoulders, and stood. Above them, a helicopter's rotors began to hume in the distance. Snow swirled around the branches. Dean looked down at the dog, this silent, black-furred ghost who had appeared out of nowhere, led him to a hostage, brought down 2 armed men, and now stood at his side like they'd worked together for years. "Who are you?" Dean asked softly. The dog didn't answer, of course, but it leaned against him. And somehow, that said enough. The snow had settled into a quiet hush by the time the medics arrived. Dean stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the stretcher vanish into the belly of the chopper. The rescued man, still unconscious, clutched a bundle of blue fabric tightly in his fists, a child's jacket, though no child had been found. Dean looked down. The dog lay beside his boots, resting but alert, the wound on his side cleaned and wrapped by the paramedics. Despite their gentle hands, he hadn't allowed anyone but Dean to come too close. Every time someone reached out, he looked straight at Dean first, waiting for permission. That kind of loyalty, it didn't come from the streets. It came from training. And loss. Dean crouched next to the dog, ran a gloved hand over his thick black fur, and murmured, "Someone taught you how to fight, how to protect. That means someone also let you go." The dog blinked slowly, eyes dark and intelligent, as if he understood. Deputy Alvarez stepped up, holding a clipboard, both suspects in custody. One's got a shattered knee, the other's still unconscious. No IDs, no prints. But we did find something weird. Dean stood. "Go on." Alvarez flipped to the last page on the clipboard. The SUV was scrubbed. No VIN, no registration, everything sanded down. But the seats had claw marks in the back. Deep ones. Same pattern you see from dogs trying to get out. Dean's jaw tightened. They had him locked inside. That's not all. K9 officers are trained to stay quiet. This guy's different. He growls, alerts, like he's halfway between stray and service animal. Dean glanced back at the dog. He's not halfway. He just remembers. That night, Dean brought the dog, now temporarily dubbed Ghost by dispatch, back to his cabin on the edge of the forest. It was a small place, wood-burning stove, worn leather furniture, faded pictures of service buddies on the mantel. The kind of home built by someone who'd seen enough of the world to want quiet. Ghost circled once by the fire and lay down without a word. Dean poured himself a cup of black coffee, sat beside the old file cabinet, and began searching. Not on his computer, he trusted paper more than pixels. What he was looking for wasn't official. It was buried in the margins of memory. 20 minutes in, he found it. An old case. 8 years back. A federal sting in Arizona involving a contractor who'd trained canines for both military and law enforcement. The operation had collapsed when the trainer was accused of cruelty, even weaponizing some of the dogs for off-the-book jobs. Most of the animals were seized, retrained, or put down, but 4 were never accounted for. One of them, a black German Shepherd mix with a white chest patch, responded to verbal commands, advanced tracking, bite-and-hold tactics, and had a tendency to select his own targets. Codename Bishop. Dean set the file down slowly. Bishop had vanished the same week the trainer was arrested. The last note in the file reads simply, "Assumed dead. No further sightings." Until now. Dean looked toward the fire. "Ghost, no." Bishop opened one eye and watched him silently. "You ran," Dean said aloud. "Or maybe someone let you go before things got worse." He leaned forward, the heat from the fire brushing his skin. "You've been living out there all this time, waiting for something. Or someone." Bishop didn't move. But his tail tapped the wooden floor once. The next morning, the case deepened. The man they'd rescued, still unconscious, was identified as a junior chemical engineer who had gone missing 2 weeks ago. His employer was a defunct government contractor with suspected ties to military bio-research. Dean's instinct screamed, this wasn't just a kidnapping. This was a cleanup, a disposal. And Bishop? He hadn't found Dean by mistake. He had returned to stop something. To finish something. Dean sat at his desk, staring at the file, the names, the dates. Something from 8 years ago was stirring again. And somehow, a dog that no longer officially existed was the only one who saw it coming. The wind had shifted. It no longer carried the clean scent of mountain snow, but something mustier, heavier, like rusted steel left to rot under pine needles in time. Dean Rourke tightened his coat and followed Bishop deeper into the forest. The dog's gait swift but purposeful. They'd been walking for nearly half an hour since sunrise, past where the roads ended and the trees thickened into silence. No birds, no animals, no footprints. Just the sound of boots crunching frost and Bishop's low growl guiding him forward. Dean had found the coordinates tucked inside the junior engineer's wallet, barely legible, scribbled on the back of a coffee receipt. Cross-referencing it with his own case notes, had pulled up an old black site, decommissioned according to federal reports nearly a decade ago, supposedly bulldozed. But Bishop had reacted the moment they neared the area, nose to the ground, tail low and steady. He knew this place. Maybe he never forgot it. They crested a ridge and stopped. The clearing below was unnatural, perfectly square, like someone had carved out a piece of the forest and abandoned it. At the center stood a structure. Low, concrete, overgrown with ivy and silent under layers of snow. Its roof had caved slightly in one corner, and rust stains streaked down what was once a security keypad beside a metal door. Faded letters were still visible across the front. Tier 7 RD, no admittance without clearance. Dean drew his sidearm and exhaled. Let's find out what they buried. The door groaned when he forced it open. Inside, the air was stale and bitter cold, reeking of ammonia and mold. The hallway sloped down gently, lined with broken lights and frost-covered tiles. Every step echoed as if the building itself hadn't heard life in years. Bishop moved ahead of him, ears sharp, body low, sniffing the floor and walls. His hackles rose as they passed a shattered observation window behind it, a room filled with broken kennels and empty vials. The nameplates still clung to the glass: Specimen 04, K9 Beta, Specimen 07, K9 Bishop. Dean's stomach turned. Each kennel was too small. No bedding, no names, only numbers. And claw marks. Deep, frantic gouges in the reinforced walls as if the animals had tried to escape something that never stopped. Jesus, Dean whispered. Bishop let out a low growl. They reached a door at the far end of the corridor, thicker than the others, secured by a rusted hydraulic lock. Dean holstered his gun and leaned into the handle. It took all his strength, but the mechanism finally gave way with a choking hiss. Inside was a small control room. Monitors long dead, a desk overturned, file cabinets ransacked. Yet one drawer remained jammed shut. Dean forced it open, sending dust into the air. He pulled out a folder. Real paper, stamped red, Termination Protocol, Project Warden. Inside, photos, reports, dates, behavioral logs of K9 units trained for clandestine missions, recovery, enforcement, and eventually, suppression. There were references to human trials. Canine empathy thresholds exceeded projection, subjects forming independent ethical response patterns. In the margin, a handwritten note. Bishop refused to bite the child, subject decommissioned, tagged for disposal. Dean closed the folder slowly. He wouldn't hurt them, he murmured, looking down at the dog now sitting beside him. You were trained to follow orders, and you chose not to. Bishop gave a soft huff and leaned into his leg. Suddenly, a creak echoed down the corridor. Not theirs. Dean drew his gun again, spinning toward the hallway. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone else was here. He turned off his flashlight and pressed his back to the wall, Bishop silent at his side. Shadows shifted at the hallway's mouth, two men in tactical gear, night vision goggles glowing faintly green. Dean whispered, "Stay." But Bishop didn't. He moved forward before Dean could stop him, teeth bared, silent as a shadow, and lunged at the first intruder. Chaos exploded. Gunfire tore through the room, sparks flying from broken monitors. Dean returned fire, dropping the second man with a shot to the shoulder. The first was on the ground. Bishop's teeth clamped on his wrist, keeping the weapon pinned until Dean cuffed him. Blood trickled across the control room floor. Dean looked at the unconscious man and the badge half torn from his vest. Private sector, Everlight Security. Not government, not police. Something darker. Dean turned to Bishop. They're cleaning house again. The dog growled in agreement. Dean knew this wasn't over. This wasn't a rescue. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Dean gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual as the Jeep bounced along the frozen backroads, tires slicing through powdery snow under the pale light of early dusk. In the passenger seat, Bishop lay still but alert, head resting on his paws, one eye open and watching the trees blur past. The tension inside the cabin was thick, saturated with unanswered questions and the pounding truth that someone was watching them, someone who never stopped watching. After escaping the underground compound, Dean had handed over the two subdued intruders to state authorities, but within an hour both men had disappeared in transfer. The official line was a clerical error. Dean didn't buy it. Neither did Bishop. The dog hadn't slept since. He paced the cabin all night, ears twitching at sounds too distant for Dean to hear. The kind of behavior a survivor picks up after years of not being able to afford comfort. Now they were heading north. Dean's old military contact, Tom Greaves, ran a listening post out past Three Forks, a private man who owed Dean a favor and who might have the gear to trace the signal Bishop had reacted to inside the compound. Everlight Security. That name didn't appear in any law enforcement databases. But Bishop had known the moment he saw those men. His growl wasn't fear. It was recognition. The Jeep skidded slightly as Dean pulled onto a dirt road marked only by a bent stop sign and a faded cattle gate. 5 minutes later, the road ended in front of a barn built more for secrets than livestock. Greaves stood waiting in the doorway, all beard and flannel, holding a thermos of coffee like a monk guarding a relic. "You look like hell," Greaves said. "Thanks for the mirror," Dean replied. Then his eyes dropped to Bishop. "That him?" Dean nodded. He saved a man's life, took down 2 armed operators, tracked a hidden lab no one's supposed to remember. Greaves tilted his head. "And you think he's carrying something more?" Dean opened the back of the Jeep and pulled out a metal canister taken from the compound, a sealed vial labeled Cognitive Transfer Serum V2.7. Inside, the liquid shimmered unnaturally, almost alive. "They weren't training dogs," Dean said. "They were trying to copy them. Extract what made them loyal, what made them choose right instead of follow orders." Greaves whistled. "Mind mapping a dog's ethics. That's a hell of a black project." "They failed," Dean said. "Except Bishop. He didn't fail. He refused." Greaves led them into the barn. It was darker than it looked from the outside, lined with old computer rigs, cables, a shortwave array, and satellite hookups. It buzzed with energy, the kind of low-frequency hum that feels like a heartbeat in the walls. Bishop paced, sniffing equipment with uneasy purpose. Then, he froze. In front of one monitor. Greaves frowned. "That system's not even on." Dean moved closer. "Turn it on." When the screen flickered to life, it displayed a map. No labels, just grid points. One red dot blinking deep in the Rockies. Coordinates aligned exactly with a ghost site Dean thought was just a rumor, a holding facility once used to store experimental subjects that couldn't be rehabilitated. It was called the Vanishing Point. Bishop growled low. Dean exhaled. "That's where they're going. That's where they're erasing everything." Greaves pulled out a folder and handed it over. "I got this weeks ago. Thought it was junk, but now," read the footnote. Dean opened the folder. It contained a short memo, author unknown, about an upcoming asset purge. At the bottom, in a hastily typed postscript, was one line. "K9B is still active. Terminate upon sight." Dean clenched his jaw. They're hunting him. Greaves stared at Bishop. And he's hunting them right back. Outside, the wind shifted again. The trees stopped swaying. And in the distance, a silent drone hovered for a moment against the cloudy sky before vanishing into the mist. Dean turned to Bishop. "If we're going to make this right, we go there. Together." Bishop didn't hesitate. He walked to the barn door, sat down, and waited. As if he already knew the way. The road to the Vanishing Point wasn't on any map. No GPS signal, no mile markers, no cell towers for 100 miles in any direction. Just frost-bitten forest swallowing a winding dirt path carved by time and silence. Dean Rourke drove in second gear, headlights off, guided only by moonlight and the occasional glint of ice on the trees. Beside him in the passenger seat, Bishop sat upright, perfectly still, his gaze never leaving the woods. Neither of them had spoken for the last hour. They didn't need to. By the time they reached the final turn, dawn had begun to stain the sky with shades of cold amber. The air was too quiet. No bird song, no wind, just a heavy stillness that pressed down on the land like an invisible weight. The compound appeared through the trees, half buried in snow, but unmistakably active. Faint plumes of heat rose from concealed vents, and lights flickered behind narrow glass panels. It wasn't a ruin. It was functioning. Alive. Dean parked 100 yards out, crouched beside the Jeep, and scanned the perimeter with binoculars. Guards in black tactical gear patrolled the outer walkways, their patterns tight and precise. No logos, no flags, just silence and guns. "This is it," Dean murmured. Bishop whined once soft and low but didn't move. Dean reached into the back seat, pulled out a black duffel bag, and unzipped it to reveal 2 tactical vests, one for him and one smaller. Custom fit for Bishop. He held it up. "You wore one of these once," Dean said. "Might feel different now." Bishop stepped forward and let Dean strap it on without protest. They crossed the tree line at dawn. Moving through snow and shadow, they reached the eastern wall unnoticed. Dean found an old utility tunnel half covered in branches and frost. He pried open the rusted grate, motioned Bishop forward, and together they descended into the dark. The tunnel stank of mold and chemicals. Somewhere far above, machinery hummed like a distant storm. After 15 minutes of crawling, they reached a hatch marked Sublevel 3, Behavioral Studies. Dean pressed his ear to the steel. Nothing. He opened it. Inside was a hallway lined with one-way mirrors, broken control panels, and rows of kennels empty. Some still had name tags bolted to the bars: K9 Alpha, K9 Delta, K9 Bishop. Bishop stopped in front of his old cell. He didn't growl. He didn't move. He just stared. Dean stepped up beside him, heart pounding. On the floor inside was a single worn tennis ball, stained and cracked with age. A reminder. A scar. "They kept you here," Dean said, "and made you choose between obedience and conscience." Bishop didn't look away. A sudden beep pierced the silence. Dean spun toward the sound. A red light blinked on a motion sensor at the end of the hall. "We've been seen," he whispered. A klaxon howled through the compound. Doors slammed. Boots thundered on upper floors. Dean turned. "Go." They ran. Through metal corridors and maintenance stairs, dodging gunfire and smoke grenades. Dean laid suppressive fire while Bishop darted between cover, his movements sharp, deliberate, not like a dog but like a soldier. They reached the operations room by accident. The door had been left ajar in the chaos. Inside, rows of servers blinked beside a single glowing monitor. On the screen, a live schematic of the facility's asset disposal wing. At its center, a digital outline of Bishop's body rotated slowly. Under it, termination order active. Countdown, 2:14. "They knew you'd come back," Dean said breathlessly. This was a trap. A hidden panel hissed open. A man stepped out. White lab coat. Thin, almost skeletal face. Eyes that didn't blink enough. "You should have let him die in the woods," the man said coldly. "He's an anomaly. An error in the system. You don't rehabilitate code like his. You erase it." Dean raised his weapon. "Back away." The man smiled. "You don't understand. He's the last one. The only one who didn't break. The only one who chose empathy over programming. That makes him dangerous." "Then why keep him alive?" "Because we couldn't replicate him." Dean didn't wait for more. He fired. The scientist collapsed, blood spreading across the glowing console. Dean rushed to the terminal and slammed his fist against the keyboard, canceling the countdown. The screen went black. Bishop stepped forward and placed a paw gently on the man's chest. Then he looked up at Dean, not with sadness but with finality. Dean whispered, "It's over." But even as they exited the room, alarms still rang. Outside, more figures were converging. The facility was going into full lockdown. Dean turned to Bishop. "There's one way out. You ready?" Bishop barked once. Clear. Steady. They ran together toward the northern tunnel, the one Bishop had never escaped from. This time they would. Dean Rourke pushed forward in the dark, sweat mixing with melted frost as he sprinted through the concrete corridor with Bishop at his side. The sound of boots echoed behind them, shouts, commands, the barking of orders not unlike those Bishop had once been trained to obey. But now he wasn't running toward those voices. He was running away from them, leading Dean to something they both knew mattered more than escape. At the far end of the tunnel, the wall curved left into a blast door sealed by a biometric lock. Dean skidded to a halt, eyes scanning for an access panel. "Damn it," he hissed, slamming his fist against the door frame. "They've sealed it from the main hub." Bishop stood still beside him. His ears pricked. He turned and looked back, not at Dean, but at the darkness stretching behind them. He listened. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, sniffing along the seam of the wall. His nose found a gap, barely visible to the human eye. A maintenance port. Dean's eyes widened. "You know this place?" Bishop looked at him only for a moment, then turned back to the wall and scratched once. It clicked open with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow vertical shaft, a secondary control junction. Dean moved to his side. "What are you doing?" Bishop placed both paws inside and began climbing slowly, carefully, through the maze of steel and wires, his silhouette fading upward. A moment later, the tunnel lit red. A recorded voice echoed down the corridor. "Facility purge in 60 seconds. All non-authorized assets will be neutralized." Dean stared at the blast door. It remained closed. "No," he muttered. "You're not doing this alone." He reached for the shaft, but it was already closing. "Bishop," he shouted. From within, the faintest sound echoed back one soft bark. Dean slammed his palm against the frame, breathing hard, helpless. Then the lights flickered. The blast door unlocked. A loud metallic groan signaled its release, followed by the whoosh of vacuum-sealed air. Dean didn't hesitate. He threw it open and dashed inside a narrow service tunnel lined with fiber optics and old maintenance tracks. The light at the end shimmered. The exit. He sprinted toward it. Behind him, the ground trembled. A low, deep hum started to build, growing into a roar that shook dust from the ceiling. Dean burst out into the tree line just as a blast tore through the compound. Fire, smoke, and debris sprayed into the sky. A tower of light erupted from the shaft Bishop had entered, briefly illuminating the forest with an eerie, golden glow. Then silence. Dean turned back, shielding his eyes from the heat, heart racing faster than it had during any mission. The air was thick with ash and memory. He waited. Tight. Called Bishop's name. No answer. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Then, out of the smoke, something moved. A black silhouette. Low to the ground. Burnt fur, trembling legs. "Bishop." Dean ran to him, falling to his knees. The dog collapsed into his arms, breathing shallow, body singed but alive. Dean held him close, pressing his forehead against Bishop's, voice cracking. "You stubborn son of a..." Bishop gave a single soft exhale, tail tapping once on the dirt. He'd overridden the controls. He'd opened the final door. He'd bought them both a future. Greaves' voice crackled over Dean's emergency radio. "We've got the data. Satellite ping confirms. Everything's out. Everyone's seeing it. Bishop's not a ghost anymore. He's a witness." Dean didn't answer. He just looked down at the dog in his arms. "You're more than that," he whispered. "You're the reason any of us still get to choose." The sun began to rise. A new day. And for the first time in years, Bishop closed his eyes not to escape, but to rest. 3 months later, the air above Silverpine Ridge carried a different kind of stillness, not one of fear or secrecy, but of peace. Where the Vanishing Point compound once stood was now a scorched clearing cordoned off by federal investigators and watched quietly by the press. Drones hovered for footage. Officials came and went, dodging questions. But none of them had the whole story. Only Dean Rourke and a select few knew the full truth. And only one of them had lived it in flesh and blood. A gentle breeze stirred the branches above a small grassy hill near the edge of the forest. At its center stood a bench carved from local cedar. Next to it, embedded in a granite stone, was a plaque. "Here rests Bishop K9 Unit 07. Trained for war. Chose to protect. Taught us what obedience never could." Dean sat on the bench, fingers tracing the engraving as a quiet group gathered behind him. Veterans, officers, kids, strangers. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because they heard rumors of a dog who disobeyed a kill order to save a child. A dog who uncovered a facility that was never supposed to exist. A dog who walked into fire and came out carrying the conscience of those who couldn't. Next to Dean sat Maya, a teenager whose older brother Bishop had saved back when this had only been a missing person case. She held a worn stuffed bear and a photo of her brother with Bishop on that first rescue day, blurry and smiling. "I never got to say thank you," Maya said softly. "You just did," Dean replied. A gentle bark cut through the morning air. From the side path came movement. Bishop. His gait was slower now. A slight limp remained, and the fur on his left side hadn't fully grown back, but his eyes were clear, his head held high, and the children, every single one of them, ran to him. He let them. He let them pet his back, wrap their arms around his neck, whisper stories into his ears like he was the safest place in the world, because he was. Dean stood and watched. Bishop had chosen not to fade, not to become a statistic in a file buried beneath concrete and fire. He had chosen to live. And now he would be more than a soldier. He would be a teacher. Later that afternoon, under the golden canopy of sunlit trees, a ribbon was cut in front of a new stone building not far from the memorial bench. On its facade were the words, "Bishop Center for Ethical K-9 Training and Recovery." The first of its kind. A place where former service dogs would be retrained for rescue, for therapy, for schools. Where kids like Maya could heal from trauma by caring for those who had survived it too. Where obedience would no longer mean silence but the courage to say no, to choose right. Dean took the microphone for a moment. The crowd hushed. He wasn't made to lead, he said, voice steady. He wasn't programmed to feel. But when he looked into the face of pain, he didn't turn away. He didn't follow. He stood. And that's how he saved me. He turned to Bishop. "And now we follow you." The applause was quiet, gentle, the kind that didn't demand attention but offered reverence. As the sun dipped lower, lanterns were lit and set into the air. One by one, they drifted upward, dancing like stars above the trees. Maya let go of hers last, whispering the same words Bishop had heard in the hospital hallway months ago. "You're my hero." Dean looked up at the lanterns, then at the dog sitting beside him, eyes glowing in the twilight. He didn't need words to know what came next. Bishop had found his voice. And he would use it not in sound, but in every child he helped heal, every officer he reminded of their oath, and every story told by those who witnessed what he did. His promise was never spoken. It was lived. Thank you for listening to this powerful story of loyalty, courage, and redemption. If Bishop's journey moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more unforgettable stories like this one. Leave a comment to share your thoughts. And don't forget to hit the bell so you won't miss our next episode. Your support keeps these stories alive.